Three, two, one. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of a different podcast. As always, I'm here with Lou and our special guest today, Sam Boone. He was a former baseball player at Marshall University and current pitching coach at Shoreline Community College near Seattle, Washington. And Booney, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing good today, man. Just excited to be on. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
well, we're glad to have you, and it's always good to hear from another JUCO kid because JUCO was definitely a formative experience for me, and I know it was for Collin as well. So to hear your perspective will be very nice. Just kind of getting into it, kind of just give us a little background on where you played and just kind of how you ended up coaching where you're coaching now.
So grew up in Shoreline, Washington, and out of high school was recruited to a lot of Pac-12 schools, major D1s. Went to Washington State. Didn't play well. Didn't realize kind of the vicious cycle of, you don't play well, you're out. So basically, went to Shoreline Community College the next year. My pitching coach from high school is the coach there, so it was just a perfect fit. Played in Bend during the summer and had a good year in the NWAC. That summer, I wasn't committed, though, to go anywhere. And so I think 2 starts in, I got a call from Marshall. Got offered, said, I'm in right away. Went out there, tore my UCL, and then kind of came back from surgery. Never was really the same, though. It wasn't the 91, 92. So then I decided, what's the next thing I want to do? It's coach. Like, I had a really unique experience where it was, hey, you're not good enough. And then randomly it turned into, oh, you're better than we thought you'd be, but you're at a different school now. So now it's just kind of the idea of getting these kids at Shoreline that I'm coaching just to kind of see, like, the perspective like I had, kind of share it, because at the end of the day, if your goal is to move on, I know how to do it from a place like Shoreline. Falling in love with that process of being a junior college baseball player. It's one of the most cruel things and one of the best things at the same time. And I think you guys could both agree with that, where there are days where you just don't want to move, don't want to do anything, but you got to go play 2 games.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really fun getting to kind of guide the kids along that journey and, like, making sure they kind of stay on track.
How has that transition been from player to coach? Because I know I did it at Western Oregon University, and it was something that it took there was a definite transition period for me to kind of understand my role, and not only that, but like how to approach different players. I did it as a player, but it was a completely different thing when I was coaching.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I think I haven't made the full transition over from player, because I think I still relate well to the guys in different situations. But I'd say the biggest transition has been all of the stuff that, like, when you're a player and you say, like, wow, coach is really kind of on one today, it makes sense now. Where it's, they're in the office all morning, or we are now, and it's like, 25 things could go wrong. Administration could have something that they want you to do that, you don't really get a ton of guidance on necessarily. A recruit could not come after saying he was. So you can kind of understand those, like, predetermined bad moods that, like, coaches were in when you played, and it's kind of like, oh, what? Like, why is he mad today? So I think it's been kind of seeing that and being able to recognize it, because I think I still have that side of being a player in a bit, where it's like, okay, like, I know these guys probably don't want to be here on a Thursday in the rain to do, 30 minutes of bunt defense and then, a tempo scrimmage. So it's finding ways to, like, make it fun, kind of thinking back to, like, the ways, like, of the really good teams I was on, like, the energy there was, and how to just kind of translate that from a coach's perspective, I think.
Yeah, I've been helping out volunteer coaching for a team with the Kansas City Urban Youth Academy, and it's a 14U team, which I've never really coached much in my life. But basically, what I've found is that the kids definitely are more likely to listen to a younger coach. A lot of what you were kind of describing is a lot of miscommunication because as an older guy, like my senior year of playing baseball, I started to realize how much the coaches had to do that didn't revolve around just coaching the kids.
Yep.
And so that perspective is something that you obviously gain, especially going to a JUCO where that's not necessarily a sought after position in the sense that there's a lot of things that you like. If you're at a D1 program, a lot of those smaller things, you got people to handle that for you. And so that's part of it for sure. But like me being a volunteer coach, the kids listen to me. I go there. They're happy to see me. They never get pissed at me. They're just getting, they get mad at the head coach. And that's something where it's like, you can't really see that as even a parent too. And parents today are so different than they were before. So it's definitely, there's a lot more to it than people would typically think, especially at the JUCO level.
Yeah, no. And it's one of those things where it's, at the JUCO level, like for us, like we don't have our own field. So we're renting fields, and we rent the local high school that I went to. So, we have a good relationship there, but there are rules. Like we don't get, a ton of field time. We're inside a lot because we have a facility, but it's, you have to be really creative at this level as a coach. And the ones who usually do a good job are the ones who move on to get really big jobs eventually. So it's just one of those things where it's, how can you make this the best possible situation for the players? Because one, I experienced it, and our setup now is a lot better than it was when I played. But two, it's, it is tough. Like it's really not meant for anyone. And I think that's one of the biggest things, like some of those difficult conversations that you have to have with kids where it's, like not everyone's cut out to do it like at this level. Like, you may be the most talented kid in the world, but something has to change. And that's probably been the hardest part, is like finding a way to come across in those type of talks. I haven't had very many of them, but where it's just, in all seriousness, do you want to do this? And some kids don't.
Yeah. What you mentioned earlier, you talked about like when you first went to Washington State, you were like, I was not aware of the viciousness of like, you got to perform.
Yeah.
And like, that is something that I definitely realized. I actually got redshirted my first year at Scottsdale Community College, not because of an injury. And I mean, obviously that's a vicious cycle. But when I got to Mississippi State, I realized quite just how vicious it was, and not in a way that they're going to scream and yell at you. But it's like everyone here already knows that this is such a high level that like we just don't mess around here. Like, do you know what this is? Like, this is next level. So you being a player here, you have to already know that. And that's something that a lot of people don't have much insight to.
Well, and it's one of those things where it was like, and I appreciate that time at Washington State because it gave me that like kind of chip on my shoulder to be able to keep going forward with baseball. Cause it was like, okay, I want to do this. This wasn't an ideal year, but like that idea where you show up to practice and it's not about who's the most talented. Coaches, like big time coaches, seem to love the guys they get for free, the preferred walk on who, they just discovered a week before school started, right? And it's like those guys execute everything because they didn't have the huge talent that showed up at Perfect Game, Baseball Northwest, the area codes. And it was like, oh, yeah, we'll take a shot on this guy. And it's like those guys always get through it. Now, I was in a different boat. I was a bigger recruit with a lot of talent, but mentally I wasn't ready to be like on my own necessarily, where it was like, I can show up and do this work and know I'm doing the right thing to contribute towards a successful baseball career. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I learned that summer going to Bend with Alan Embry and all the coaches there. Like, it was just, hey, when you get to the field, you're not going to try to do too much. You're going to do what you need to do to go out and pitch tonight. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, like just knowing what your role is and knowing what you need to do to be ready.
And the one shortcoming, I think, in the development piece, especially in high school, before guys get to college, is the mental aspect of what is actually happening. and having the tools to be able to deal with situations and just deal with yourself in a way that is going to produce successful results. And it's not that the results are the end all be all, but like the process of going through that in a mental development state isn't really talked about all that much unless you have somebody A, who's been through it, or B, has some sort of psychology background or something like that they understand those tools. But that, for the vast majority of people, I would say, especially in high school, they don't have that. And I was lucky enough, I had the opportunity to play for my JUCO coach. He taught psychology. He taught sports psychology at the junior college. And so that was a unique thing, because what he was able to do was teach us these mental tools and these mental skills that we could carry over, not just in the baseball realm, but in life as well. And being able to, he was able to bridge that gap of mental training and athletics. But that was just a unique opportunity for me, and that helped me. But a lot of people don't have access to that. And a lot of people, especially as they get younger, do not have that. And so I think, like, to your point about going to Washington State and realizing, like, oh, like, this is what this is like there was no way for you to necessarily prepare for that unless you had the right resources and the right people around you.
Well, and I think another one of it too, I think I had the right people around me. I mean, I was surrounded by like 2 draft guys a year from my high school. Like, I kind of got it. But it was also one of those things where it was kind of like, okay, like, that's great, but hey, you're going to go be by yourself and just have to be able to, like, show up any given day. Like, no one has a script for how college is going to go for anyone. So I think a lot of that was just like, it wasn't that like everyone there was that much better. Like, they were just all pretty normal baseball players, but it was like, how are you going to separate yourself? And I think a lot of guys get stuck in that trap of kind of being a people pleaser for their coach. But the reality about college coaches is all they want to see is the result. A lot of them, like the really good ones, and I have a lot of respect for my coach at Washington State, who was our pitching guy. It was, hey, here's the program, but I'm going to go over there and you're going to figure out how to do this. And he was a psych guy. So the theory was, if you put your mind to it, the body's going to organize itself to get there. So he gave us the tools to kind of, get there. But his big thing was, you got to will yourself to that next step, because you're going to figure it out. Because in reality, like, you go into Goss Stadium, 3,000 fans down your neck, you're not going to be able to breathe. You know what I mean? Coach isn't going to be there to hold your hand. So I think that there is something to be said for letting kids kind of figure it out by themselves.
Yeah. Well, it's also a maturity thing, which is kind of what you both have described, because you have to have a certain level of maturity to play on a high level team. Like, when I got to Scottsdale Community College, I'll definitely say, like, I was not the most mature individual. I hadn't had a lot of life experience, but what Collin was kind of describing with the guy his coach, who gave him the tools of somewhat of a mentor, basically that was him allowing you to mature. He looked at you as an individual, which is kind of what Sam was describing. Like, every case is so individual that a true coach is going to look at each individual case and say, how do I get this kid to mature to the point where he understands how to truly get better? Because there is no one way. Like, there's no scripture. And it's just every single kid has to say, okay, well, for me, it was me hitting off the tee every single day, 365 days in a row. That's what changed for me, where it was like, I'm going to do this every single day. And it wasn't necessarily the tee work. It wasn't what I was telling myself. It wasn't my philosophy. So I did it every single day. I was bought into that level. And there's so many ways to go about it. Like, with each individual case, that's just one example for me of allowing myself to mature as a baseball player, was just doing it every single day.
100%. I think another one that just doesn't get talked about enough, and I think Collin has seen this now while he's been working out and training, like the routine, man. It's, eating the amount of meals in a day that you need to eat, making sure like you're in bed by a certain time, like all of that stuff just like at a lot of places gets neglected, and it's probably the most important part of this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's completely forgotten about. It really is. And to eliminate distractions, like that is the best piece of advice you could give to a college player trying to go to the next level. It's like, all right, well, here's the best recipe I can give you. Spend your time at practice, rest, and then work out on your own, whatever that means to you. Because you eliminate the distractions, you give yourself the best chance to advance.
And stretch a lot. Foam roll. Make sure you're done.
That's the whole strength aspect that people don't get into. Even just extending your arm all the way up breaks down the muscles and say your lat, and that's a whole nother strength training. It's just stretching. So that's an excellent point that you bring up.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool to go put 500 pounds on a barbell and deadlift it, but at the end of the day, like, I mean, it's not going to do that much for you if you can't move at all.
Yeah.
The range of motion pieces, nobody understands, like it. And when you're looking at the body, it's like you can have in your shoulder, if you have 5 less degrees of motion than the next guy, and there's I don't remember what the exact degree threshold is of movement that is considered healthy in throwers. But if you're 5% or 5 degrees under that range, like your chances of either injuring your elbow or your shoulder go up drastically just in a 5 degree. And it's a tiny little amount, but like that little amount can make all the difference in your body and the kinetic chain unlocking in a proper manner, as opposed to not being able to decelerate fast enough. And then you're popping something, you know what I mean? And like, that's just one example of the stretching thing. But yeah, it is great to be able to, and honestly, if you can go put 500 pounds on the bar and deadlift it, great. And, you should work towards throwing around heavy things, in my opinion. Like, you need to get stronger. However, strength with flexibility as opposed to just strength is the key, because you can be as strong as you want, as muscle bound as you want, but if you can't move and you don't have those degrees of motion, well, then everything starts to slow down. Your fast twitch fibers, they start to slow down, and now you can't explode. Now you're not explosive, but you're just big. So there's a fine line, in my opinion, and there are some sports that you can get away with it more than others, and I think baseball has the finest line because of the motion that we do, and the throwing, and the constant rotations and hitting, and all these different little minuscule movements that have to be explosive. Like, there's an extremely fine line, as opposed to football. Like, if you're just trying to run through somebody.
Yeah, no, and like, I think football's also okay. I think football's interesting, though, because, like, those big offensive linemen, they weigh 325 pounds.
Quick.
But, like, okay, take me, I weigh 245. They're my height, weigh 50 pounds more, and they're probably faster than I am. So.
And how tall are you?
6'8", 6'9".
So, yeah, you're an anomaly in that regard as well. But it's just so interesting how us three, being baseball players, we understand stretching at a different level, because obviously bands are heavily used. Drive line is now commonplace at every practice pretty much,
Yep.
And when you think about what stretching is, like, well, I'll tell you one story, because I've read the book Juiced by Jose Canseco countless times. And one thing that he described, to Colin's point, was that when he was taking a bunch of steroids and he was, hitting, obviously playing in the big leagues, he said that if he swung too hard, he could intentionally get his shoulder to pop out of place. He was so strong over the limit of his joints and things like that, that if he chose to, he could swing so hard that he was going to rip his joint out of its place. So that's just an interesting point to just, you got to use your strength. That's kind of how I would sum up what he said a second ago. But my point is that now, when you don't play a sport, like, you don't understand how valuable stretching is, because even people today, like, obviously the United States has a huge obesity problem, But people don't know that, like, working out, what you're doing is you're breaking down your muscles, and then you use food to rebuild them, and you use rest to rebuild them. So just stretching is working out. Like that, people don't understand that. It's like if you do that, you're going to actually build muscle, and you're going to create stronger like foundations for your joints and other large tendons and other things like that by just breaking down that muscle and giving it actual food to rebuild itself. And I think that's a huge problem in the United States. And it's just a very small part of baseball that a lot of baseball players don't like take to heart and take to like their actual life after baseball. A lot of people don't. But it's something that I found extremely useful. And as somebody who's 100, I'm 6'1" and about 185 pounds right now, played at like 195, 200. And, you know, I've lost a lot of weight, but I haven't lost that much strength in the gym because I stretch and I work out a lot smarter than I did before.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. Like my senior year, I was up to 280, I think, intentionally. Like it was just like, all right, let's see what this does. Because the arm never really came back all the way from Tommy John. So it was like, all right, let's see if we can get a little bit of velo from gaining weight. And like I was strong, like really strong. And it wasn't like lacking a ton of athleticism, but it's like now it's like I just go run a couple miles a day and then I do like yoga. And it's like if you were to say like, hey, go lift like somewhat close to what you can do while you're in school, I could probably do it. No desire to do it, but
Yeah. There's no use in it,
yeah.
but it's really not. Yeah. It's not what people think it is as far as working out. It's like, oh, you got to be in there every day to be able to do it. It's like, that's really not the case necessarily.
Well, like those like recovery days, like if like in college you guys probably got like, you know, a packet with a calendar on it that said like recovery day this day. If you actually do the recovery, like and it's a crazy concept, it makes you like it helps you out so much. Like, you know, stretching for an hour.
Yeah. Yeah. People do
But
not have the patience to do that typically.
No.
but that comes with the maturity thing too, is being able to take the recovery day and actually use it. Because, I mean, first of all, I think there's two facets to this. When I was 18, 19 years old playing college baseball, my body felt good nearly 100% of the time. No matter what I was doing, no matter like I could have lifted
Yeah.
500 pounds that morning and I could go play a game in the afternoon and I felt great. It didn't really matter. But fast forward 4 years. Yeah, I could do whatever. Fast forward 4 years to at the end of my college career, it was not the same thing. And so those recovery days took a different meaning, and I almost needed that to be able just to like feel good for when I was playing later in the afternoon or whatever the case may be. And I think like the understanding of the body, understanding how much you need, what you need, and when you need it comes with age and comes with being around the game a little bit longer than when you're 18 years old and your body just feels fresh no matter what, and it doesn't really matter.
Colin, were you in Bend when we did yoga?
Oh yeah, we did some yoga.
The hot yoga classes? You know,
I'm a fan of yoga though. I like the yoga.
Huge fan.
Yeah.
But could you imagine before your senior year of college doing that hour and a half long yoga and then going out to the field 20 minutes later to get ready for a game? Just with how much your body...
I would benefit so much greater for that. And I wish we had more of that. Like when in JUCO, I took a yoga class 3 days a week. I needed an extra credit. And I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. So I took a yoga class, but it made me feel so much better. I was mid-season and I was taking yoga 3 days a week, and it was in the morning, and it ended with, Shavasana every time, which was basically nap time for 10 minutes for me. And because it was an early morning class, but it was great. I loved it. And it made me feel so much better, not just physically, but mentally. Like it was a place where I could just lock into exactly what I was doing, and I could focus on my breathing, and I could do these things that, like, yes, I would do it on my own, but to the extent that I was doing it in that class 3 days a week, it wasn't the same.
Gotcha.
Well, it's an experience too, going to a yoga class, because there's a difference between doing yoga and like actually having the experience of being mindful and having a teacher that just basically allows, like, I had to take a mandatory, I've gone to plenty of yoga classes on my own at my gym, but and several of them hot yoga, which I think is just amazing. Like, holy hell, like if you don't come out of that feeling better than you did before, it's kind of your own fault. But I took a class at Emporia State or a yoga class, and basically what happened was like people were coming in and out of the room, and it was just extremely distracting. And the entire point of yoga is to just be there with yourself and, you know, the people around you, whoever they are. It doesn't matter. Like, the experience of a yoga class is a real thing, and to make the distinction is very important, because when you actually come out, like you said, like you were going in the morning and then you come out feeling better, it's like, well, you just did something that was positive for you. Like, that's
Yeah.
something that you should do more of. And so many people, especially when I was in Emporia, not to put anybody down in it, but like, nobody liked going to yoga at Emporia State. And like you said, I was a senior at the time. I could appreciate it a little bit more than I would if I was a freshman. But nobody really wanted to do it. And to get the actual experience out of it, you really have to just be mindful in the setting and pretty much lock in.
Yeah, and for me, it was always it changed my day from when I started and when I went to the class, and then I would get done, and my day was done after that until I had practice. So they were very light days, but regardless of that, like, I would go get my stuff done and then go back home, relax, maybe do a little bit of homework before I went to practice or whatever. But like, it just set the pace for my day from there on out. And so that was always something I was super thankful for. And it worked for me. Like we've talked about on this podcast, you know, finding what works for you and then applying that to the point where I would say you should like exploit it, because like you should find what works for you and then just use it. Like, you should always be trying to use that to constantly better yourself in ways that you couldn't necessarily imagine before you started. And so for me, like, that is something that I like. I like the meditation and the yoga and that sort of thing. That works for me far better than journaling does, I think. It just puts me in a different spot. But, I mean, through trial and error, you have to find what works for you.
100%.
To look at something also like yoga, where it all kind of goes back to where you have to have a plan, and it's centered around maturity in a way. But when you have a plan, like, and you say you have to go to yoga, it's like, might as well be mindful, might as well get a good stretch in, might as well take it seriously. And that's just kind of how the maturity process is throughout, the life of a college baseball player. The more mature you become, the more seriously you take everything throughout your day. Because one thing that I never liked practice since I was 5 years old. I never liked practice. I liked playing baseball. I liked some drills, but there's a difference between a drill and playing in a game. And when you are able to take the drills seriously and say, hey, this is just a drill. Maybe if I can get 7 out of 10 on this extremely difficult, like, pick drill that we're doing at first base, like, if I can just shoot for 7 out of 10 for today, it's like, all right, that's good enough. But to take it seriously is so much different than just going through the motions of the drill or going through the motions of yoga. It's an entire mentality that you have throughout your entire day, and a mentality about life that you have, really, instead of just like, hey, I have practice today, I'm going to go for 3 hours. It's like, that's kind of what Sam was saying earlier about, like, the kids that, the walk-ons versus the scholarship guys, where it's like, it's not always the case, but for the most part, that walk-on knows, like, if I don't show up every day and I'm not, like, locked into the drills, I could very easily be out of here. They have $0 invested in me. I actually pay to be here. So it's just really a mentality about life that I found extremely valuable through my experience.
I also think that idea of, how, like, in college baseball, because we all played it, it's hammered into you to get a routine every single day. Like, exactly what you're going to do from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. I think it's interesting as you spend a couple of years trying to actually find a routine, and you never do because you're 18, 19 years old. There's a million distractions out there. By the time you're a senior, and Rungy could probably attest to this, like, it's almost like you have a routine, but it's more just like a checklist. Like, all right, before the game, like, I have to have this, this, and this done. And it's like you go from like this like guy trying to like figure out your first 2 years of school, like, I need to learn how to do this, like be able to like wake up at 6 every day or whatever it may be, get a meal in, then go to weights. Then by the end, it's kind of like, okay, like, as long as I have these 5 things done before whatever time the game is, whatever time practice is, I'm good. And like I have the discipline to make sure they're done no matter when I do certain things. So I think that's an interesting like aspect of maturity where it's like the older you get, it just turns into more of like all right, like this is going to be done, this, as opposed to like having your whole day scripted.
Yeah, for me, it was always the flexibility of the day, but like you're saying, basically the checklist, right? So, you wake up in the morning, you got some stuff to do, you go to weights at 5, anywhere from 5 to 7:30. It just, what depends on your program. For Scottsdale, I think we were there at like 4:45 every morning. It was just absurd.
Really fun. Look forward to it all the time.
No chokes.
It was like 2-hour workouts starting at 5 a.m., and you had to eat breakfast together. It was a whole...
you had to bring food.
Yeah, you had to eat breakfast as a team together before you worked out, and then you would just eat it to throw it up. Like, that was the whole... It was a unique experience. We can always talk more about that later. But the checklist for me was kind of the key, because all it did was ensure that I was mentally and physically prepared for whatever I was about to do in the afternoon, whether it was a game, whether it was a practice or whatever. Like, I knew, depending on what I had that day, what I needed to get done before I went. And as long as all of those things were done, then it allows that flexibility that I was talking about. And you can go through your day without feeling super stressed and anxious about having to do these things. It's just like, okay, now I can flow with the day. I can flow with what I have to do, but all of my stuff will be done. And that was kind of my balance. That's how I tried to look at it. So I didn't so some people get so stressed out, and it can't become a superstition thing either, in my opinion. Like, if you should do your things that you need to have done, but if you, for whatever reason, can't accomplish one of those things, like, that can't carry over into what you're doing and let it affect your,
you have
like,
to be able to be like, you have to be able to like expect like just something crazy to happen too, like where it's like it's not going to mess your whole day up because at 11:55, instead of eating the bagel you get for lunch every day, like they don't have it. You know what I mean? Like,
you got to be able to adjust on the fly.
Which I think like that whole summer ball thing really gets kids to like my second summer, so the first year I played with you, Collin, it was like I don't think I was ever that locked in towards the sport of baseball in my life. And it was like, it didn't matter what time I was waking up at. Like, I was going to go golf at Sun River, do whatever. I was going to be at the field at 2. By the time that game starts or by the time we hit BP, I will have got treatment on my arm, stretched, had my lift in the morning. And then, the next thing you know, it's 6:35, it's a game. And I think that's kind of like, you're never going to be able to like replicate the same day and actually be like a sane person, I feel like. It's just a matter of being ready for like whatever you need to do.
Yeah. It's the general concept of being a man, really. Like a true man, like, shows up every single day and knows what his job is and finds a way to get it done. And like, obviously not every single day you're not able to get your job done ideally every single day, because every single day is new. And to undermine or to undervalue how different every day is, because I played one summer in the Northwoods. I don't know if you ever had a chance to play in that league, but it was like 75 games in 78 days. And every single day, I mean, it was the same thing. It felt like damn close to Groundhog Day. But I mean, I really hindsight, I really liked playing in that league, and I learned a ton. And it's just I found out, pretty quick. Like I really kind of embodied, because when I worked for the Royals, one guy I always watched was Alex Gordon, and like I mean, I don't play like him. I don't necessarily think he has the best swing of anybody out there, but every single day that dude lifted the way he wanted to, and his level of discipline was something that I had never seen in person before. And so when I got to the Northwoods League, I tried to embody my inner Alex Gordon.
Yeah, like I never got to play in the Northwoods. I'm kind of thankful I didn't, because it's a lot of games.
I'm sure you heard.
Me and Collin had I think it was 55 games, and one off day a week, but that off day was usually spent traveling somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I think we went from Bend, Oregon to Kelowna one time, back to Bend to Bellingham, which is in a matter of a week, that's 40 hours on a bus.
Yeah, to put it lightly, it's 13 hours on a good day from Bend to Kelowna. And we went up there for a 3-day series, turned around, came back to Bend, and then turned around and went to back in Bend for a 3-game series, turned around, went back to Bellingham for a 3-game series, which is up by Seattle, which is 6 hours. Turn around in Bellingham for 3 games, back to Bend for 3 games. And there's one off day in there.
Tell me this wasn't the best game of your life, by the way. And it's from the worst summer in West Coast League history. And I'm just happy we got to experience being on that team together. Remember going back from Victoria, and we had to play a game that same day. We got off the bus and we're playing a game against Yakima Valley after 10 hours on the bus.
Yeah.
After our last game in Victoria.
10 hours on the bus. We were up all night because we had to wait for the ferry to get out of Victoria, which left at 6 a.m. So, you're basically up all night long, and then you get in the car or get in the bus, 10 hours, you arrive at the field at 4:30, you got a game at 6:30, and So it's a hard transition. I don't know if anybody's ever done that before, but it's very difficult.
I have a really good perspective on this because I've told 100 people this story. So we just got done losing to Victoria because our team didn't win a lot that summer. And we left the hotel at 2:30 because we had to be the first ones in line for the ferry, because if we missed it, we literally weren't going to get back on time for the game. So we get across on the ferry. It's a 2-hour ferry ride. And I had to drive a truck from Port Angeles, Washington, back to Bend, Ty Holmstrom's, because he had drove up there because he didn't have his passport at first, and he had to get it expedited. So I didn't get to sleep the whole day. And we get to Bend, I think, at 5:30 for a 6:30 start. And it was we lost, I think, 27-1. And it was the whole time, our manager's there. He's well, I kind of expected this to happen. And we're just
oh my gosh.
Thanks, man. That's great.
Yeah, vote of confidence. Much appreciated. That's got to be just about as bad as baseball can get, is when you're sitting out there and the pitcher's just constantly walking people, or they're just constantly just getting hits, and you have a half inning that lasts 45 minutes, and I just picture us playing against Western Oklahoma at Scottsdale Community College. This team
they're nice.
Probably probably the toughest JUCO team I ever seen in my whole life. They
were ranked number 1 in the country during that series.
CAC?
What?
Better than Central Arizona?
Yeah, they were ranked number 1. Yeah.
Western Oklahoma's BP, they had their 3 outfielders getting live reads, and they had their 4 starting infielders out there, and then everybody else stood beyond the fence getting their home run balls. That's really what they did. And then their BP was the most live thing I've ever heard. A lot of them speak Spanish. They're all yelling and throwing, their third baseman throwing 92 to the first baseman on every single ground ball he gets. It was probably one of the more intense things I've ever seen in my entire life.
And then they their infield outfield was like 25 minutes long, and I've never seen more baseballs being thrown in cross-directional ways all at the same time while everybody's yelling at each other than I saw in that 25-minute stint of them taking an infield outfield.
If somebody wasn't looking, they were going to get dome rocked.
Oh,
but we ended up playing them. So we played them 3 times over spring break. And the first 2 times, I believe this was your year, Collin. Correct me if I'm wrong. But they spread us twice. And then the third game was probably, equally long, probably a 4-hour. The first 2 were probably 4-hour games. And the third one was on pace to be that. I think we were only down like 10-1 in whatever inning. Started to, crawl back into it. And then John Nunnally hit a walk-off home run in the bottom of the 9th to beat Western Oklahoma for the 3rd time. And after that game, their coach had their entire team running poles, and we had finished sweeping the field, fixing home plate, all of that, and they continued to just run. We had to wait for them to be done.
I think we left the field. They were still on it. Like, we went to the locker room to change, and they were still running.
That's a whole
and they were going back to Oklahoma that day.
Yeah.
They were getting on the bus.
From Arizona.
That's not fun. That's like so have you guys heard the song Country Roads by John Denver?
Country Roads.
So allegedly the year before I got to Marshall, they lost to West Virginia, and that's like a big like rivalry thing. Apparently our coach the whole entire 3-hour ride back played the song Country Roads because West Virginia plays it after every single song or after every single game that they win. But he didn't play like the actual version of it, like the real John Denver. He played an alt rock version of it for 3 hours on a bus ride back saying, "Don't you guys just love this song? Go and lose to them even more."
Oh my God. No one would ever forget that. It's horrible.
You would never want to experience that again. Like that's not college baseball at its finest.
Well, if that's like, and like that's like the thing. Like my head coach at Marshall was the man, but I could just see him right now, just like a spitting image of him saying, "Don't you guys just love this song?"
And who's going to disagree?
Right.
Nobody's going to open their mouth. No shot. So, bringing this back to Marshall, what was it like being there with the obviously there's a storied history behind Marshall. Now, what was that like? Being there, I'm sure, is vastly different than what it is from the outside. So if you could just like kind of explain that in a way that, I don't know, makes, if there is a difference, makes sense.
It's really cool, like around the day of the memorial for it, because it's like the whole town of Huntington, West Virginia, around a fountain that they have to turn off. Huge, like 1.5 hour long thing. It is kind of weird though, because it's like I don't know. The plane crash is so far in the past that it's like, you know, kids from Washington and Oregon, because we had like 10 of them on the team, it's, you know, it didn't mean anything to us. So we had to really kind of buy into it, or kind of see like people being bought into it. So like our athletic director, he was on that first team that the movie's made about after the plane crash, you know, that got Marshall football to rise from the ashes. So it's really cool to think of it like that. Like, you know, like, man, these people were actually here for it. Like when you go to this memorial and this like ceremony, it's like all of these people were there, like a good amount, like know like how the town was affected and how it kind of got built from this. On the flip side, it's also just kind of like, it's weird to think that the reason that Marshall athletics is, you know, in a really good spot right now is because of such a tragedy. Like, it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around the fact that, like, you know, if you take this away and you take away the fact that Randy Moss didn't last at a couple schools because of various reasons, you know, I probably don't end up at Marshall University. Like, there are so many things, like, which is crazy because it was the best few years of my life, but it's amazing how something so good can be built off of a tragedy, I guess.
Yeah,
There's two
and
things
it's
that you
tough to.
said.
Yeah, go ahead,
Go ahead,
Colin.
Lou.
You go ahead.
Well, there's just two things that you said. One being the fact that there's a culture that you have to learn
Yep.
when, like, for the people that aren't there, that they haven't had necessarily a real experience with this thing outside of the Hollywood version, potentially. Like there is a aspect of culture and things that you need to learn when you get there. And I don't think that, like, you can't necessarily learn that without going through it and experiencing it. And I think that that's important just to note from, I don't know, especially the communication level, being that that's my training, but there's a lot of talk about culture and understanding culture and respecting different cultures that are outside of your own. So I think that that was an interesting point that you had made. And then also, I think the story behind everything that took place at Marshall with the plane crash and everything, it can just show how tragedy can catapult either society, a region, a school in a direction that was never necessarily thought about, and can push that organization or school to a different height than it was before. And I think life has a weird way of balancing that out at times, just being that, we can take something so bad and find a way. It's in human nature to be able to find a way to move forward, to be better than we were before. And I just think that there's so much to learn, even in those just terrible, terrible things that happen, and how we can apply those things and be better than we were before. I mean, it just says a lot about who we are, but it says a lot about what the school was able to do and how they were able to just really, truly grow from that experience.
Well, and I think the easiest answer, and like putting it all in perspective from going there, the easiest way for them to go would have been, all right, like, we don't need sports, let's just be a school. No one cares. So the fact that, and I think it's 45, 46 years, it's a bowl game every year is expected, stuff that certain schools, have nothing, like, no expectation for. It's like the fact that, like, that came from that, and then the other sports at the school are good too. It's pretty amazing to think about, because if that doesn't happen, there's a chance that Marshall never does what it does, I guess, would be the way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that probably what you said to start, kind of how you're like, you weren't from West Virginia, so when you went there, you had to learn about the culture of what they had been through. And I thought of this earlier, and I was like, how selfish would you really have to be to think that you could just go in there and embody the spirit of Marshall right away? Like, you'd have to be a narcissist to truly believe that you would have the same perspective as the AD. But the cool part is that you got to represent that when you put on the uniform. So, like, that's just a beautiful thing right there. And like you guys said, like, it brought people together. Like, in the long run, what it did was it brought people together, and it made for a better. It's like it was left better than they found it, in a way. Although it was obviously through a tragedy.
Yeah, no, 100%. And the cool part is there's this continuing want and desire to build something great out of it. And I think that is one of the best parts of it. Facility upgrades for all the sports. Like, I mean, it went from, I think, just being a football school to, okay, basketball team makes the NCAA tournament. Like, that's a pretty big freaking deal. They haven't done that since I don't know when. So pretty much taking that, and then the fact that the baseball teams had some success, the women's sports teams have had some really good success. Like, volleyball's really good now. I mean, when you have a ton of people who really believe in something, it's crazy to see what you can accomplish as a whole. And I think that it's just the perfect testament to that, and the culture around athletics and the coaches they have there.
Yeah, it in a way created a foundation for which everybody can push in one direction. Like it in a way it erased all of the differences that you could find, whether it's people in different sports, different backgrounds, whatever the case may be. It kind of just wipes that clean, and you just have a clean slate to be like, okay, now we're all starting from the same spot. Now we're pushing this way. Now we're pushing forward in a direction that maybe because of different sports or whatever, everybody has their own individual agenda. And I feel like what it did was bring everyone together, like you were saying, and then everybody's able to push one agenda together. And what can happen from that and the results of that can be far greater and make a far greater impact than just trying to have a much smaller group of people trying to all go in one direction.
Yeah, no, and just like I think it's also the understanding at the top too, like the president of the school and the athletic director. It's like, if you're not on board with this, we don't need you. Like, and that goes for the coach. Like, the coaches really have to buy into that culture. And I think it's why you see there were a few new hires around the athletic department that I think really embody it and really want to embrace being a part of it. So, I mean, if you have people like that, the only way it can go is up necessarily. Like, I mean, if you really believe in something crazy, like, it's going to eventually happen or you're going to get damn close.
From this is just an offshoot of what you just said. Does the school typically hire from within then, as far as employees are concerned, because they're already familiar with that experience and that culture, or are they like
Goes outside
semi-open?
hires.
What's that?
There's a lot of outside hires, I would say.
So
But
they
it's
have
like,
to learn on the fly.
yeah, you have to learn, and it's not like it's more of that sense of like, hey, I'm like, I think it's not as much like about what happened. It's more like kind of unspoken, like, hey, your team's going to be supporting like another team at some point over this next week. Like you're going to be going to a women's basketball, volleyball game, like something like might not do normally, but you kind of need to. You need to embrace it, and I think finding the people that are willing to like set that principle for like their players. Like if you find someone who's just really outgoing, really wants to be a part of something bigger than themselves, look no farther. Like
Yeah.
go to a place like Marshall, and they've brought in some really good people within the department. Like even like all the way down to academics for athletes. Like really bought into making it like a big deal and taking that next step even farther from what it's already been.
Yeah. One thing I did want to ask you as we kind of start to approach our time, I wanted to ask you, being the guy that is 6'8", 6'9", I know when I was in the dugout and I saw this dude coming in from the bullpen that was just tall as hell. Like, I mean, what is it like being that guy, first of all? And second of all, I would automatically assume that it's like, oh, this guy's so tall, like he doesn't throw like 88 as a sophomore in high school. Like, I mean, what is it like? Like, do you feel like there is that natural edge? Obviously, you're closer. That's but like to actually throw harder and to use your length to throw the ball harder, not to just be closer and all that. What do you kind of think of that?
I think I don't know. I don't think I'd give me like some mental edge if that's the case, or it did, because like I think I was just kind of a goofy, like happy-go-lucky guy, right, Colin?
Yes,
So
very
like,
much so.
I mean, like in terms of like from like a scientific perspective, though, the advantages: longer fingertips, longer hands, bigger hands, going to lead to more spin. The ball's going to rise. You can throw at the top of the zone. I mean, after surgery, I was maxing out at like 87, 88. A lot of 84s in there, but I was still throwing at the top of the zone, getting swings and misses. Spin rate was high. Like, I mean, I would say it helps from that perspective, but there are so many disadvantages to being tall, like growing up. Like, you can't move. I got really lucky that my mobility was decent to where like I could actually take advantage of like lifting in the weight room in high school. But other than that, I mean, like you're tripping over your own shoelaces. Like it sucks.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I once saw Anthony Davis out of because in college, he was kind of skinny. He was definitely athletic, but I saw him inclining 135 with just the bar and then a 45 on each side. And he was inclining, and you just look at how long his arms are. That's like me doing 185 or 225 on incline. Like, it's not the same thing. And you always got to put it in scale. So there's a lot to be learned from that, and everybody's different.
Well, and just like, like I was lucky that like I always had it in my mind that I sucked at like everything I did. So I worked extremely hard, like growing up, because it was like, okay, like I was really bad at Little League. Like, like I was not coordinated. I couldn't do anything. So it was like, when they started saying like, hey, lift weights, and like when I committed to Washington State, it's like, all right, like let's see what we can do. And it's like that turned into like a 500-pound squat, 600-pound deadlift. So, I mean, I fell in love with that side of it. I wish I would have fallen in love with like the stretching stuff earlier on, mobility.
Yeah, I don't know. Being an athlete, I might be biased to this, but I feel like there is an aspect to all athletes in the sense that like you want to be better. Like I think like some people who are not athletes, they lose that sense of like trying to better yourself, and sometimes in exponential fashion, like you moving towards like a 500-pound squat and a 600-pound deadlift. Like if nobody's ever lifted weights, and then you're talking about a person who's 6'8", 6'9", and you're telling them, hey, go put 500 pounds on the bar and then squat it, and then to realize how far you have to go, much farther than me. I'm 5'11", so when I squat 400 plus pounds, I don't have to move it that far. But like for you, that's significant. And so like there is a level of obsession, I think, in athletes at a most fundamental level, if they are trying to be better and to make something out of an athletic career. And I mean, that's at least how I feel about it. And that was always something I always tried to better myself, but it wasn't like I had a natural desire to do that.
Well, like, and I think, and this is something I preach coaching, which we can kind of wrap it around back to that. Like, how comfortable can you get in a really dark place every morning at 6?
Mm-hmm.
Like, finding happiness and kind of like, you kind of got to take yourself to a crazy place to actually be willing to do some of this stuff. Like, I mean, getting yelled at by a strength coach at 6 in the morning, as fun as that sounds, on paper, it kind of sucks.
Yeah, it does suck.
And, like,
go ahead.
That was one of the coolest parts about like my experiences, like where I got to play at Washington State and Marshall, is like, yeah, our strength coaches went at our necks every morning. But it was so embraced like in the weight room, because it was like that was the happy time of the day. It was kind of concerning that like, you just had a ton of guys just like there ready to rip each other's heads off to like lift as much weight as humanly possible. But like it was such a like cool experience, because it's like, how do you embrace like how terrible this is and how terrible this sounds to make it the best possible outcome?
That's a great way to put it. And I think that really it's a part of the participation trophy era that is being lost, because for me, like I absolutely needed my ass kicked at 6 a.m. And like to say like, and it's not that I absolutely needed it. I could have found it other ways. But like you were saying, you do have to get to a different place of human nature, really, because you could get up and go to at 6 a.m. and you can skip reps, and no one's going to be watching you like that all the time. But a part of human nature, like Collin was saying, is to better yourself. And when you don't have someone pushing you to that level, or doing something where it's like you have to be a part of something bigger than yourself, because at 6 a.m., like you're not doing that for you, like you're doing it for you in the sense that, you can't play unless you have to show up to play, but you really do have to do it for the others around you to do it from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. when the lift is over.
Yeah. And, going back to that, like the participation trophy era, I don't think kids have changed that much. I think it's the coaches have.
Yeah.
I think we acknowledge, like, as a coach, I think that, like, my generation of coaches acknowledge what we had to go through a lot more than, like, the coaches that brought us up do. Like, if I were to ask, like, any of my coaches from, like, Marshall or Washington State, what was the most messed up day of your college athletics career, they probably wouldn't remember. I think for, like, us, like, the kids who, like, grew up on social media and see, like, a ton of stuff, it's like, we remember everything, and it's like, so we think these kids are just automatically soft in a way. And I think it's more now, instead of like yelling at kids and like, you know, crawling up their ass and stuff, I think it's more, how do you practice like the celebratory part of it? Like, these kids need to be like celebrated in a sense where it's like, you do something good, it's actually acknowledged, unlike us where it was like, you do something good, it's just kind of expected. I think now it's more of a, you give these kids that little bit of extra when they do a really good thing, and you really show them how much you care about them performing like a really good act, like, you know, making a great play. And I think you just get that much more out of them. And I think that's a psych thing, honestly.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's just, it's a testament to just how coaching has to develop along with the way that training has developed, because kids are becoming better younger, and the best of the best, the extremes, everybody throws 100 now. You know, like when the Royals were really good, every person they had coming out of the bullpen, Kelvin Herrera, Greg Holland, Wade Davis, pretty much 9 out of the 10 guys were throwing 97, 98, 99, 100 almost every pitch. And that's a testament to how training has changed, but coaching hasn't necessarily changed. And that's something we kind of said at the very beginning of the podcast, where it's like the younger coaches are who the little kids, and not necessarily little, but, you know, high school kids and young college kids want to listen to, because some of the older coaches aren't versed in all the new training techniques that has really revolutionized the game over a very short period of time.
And I think the younger guys are so much more relatable too. Like there's the adage in coaching where the longer you're out of it, the easier the game is. And I think we're seeing a lot of coaches who are growing older who have been in this position for 35 years, and it's no disrespect to them. I mean, they have made a complete career out of this. But with that being said, the game looks so much easier because they've been out of it for so long playing. And I think like when you're young and when you're relatable as a coach, it's because you realize how difficult that is, and you realize the experiences that you had. They're much more fresh mentally, so you can go back to that place emotionally and remember those things, as opposed to somebody who's been coaching for 35 years. They don't go back there. They go back, you know, they can relate it to maybe other teams that they coach, but they don't relate it to their own playing career. And I think that's the distinction that should be made more often.
Well, it's like the, you know, and I'm not naming names here, and there's no coaches in particular. It's just a general, from what I've heard from my friends who've played all over. You know, like when you get the 60-year-old coach who's saying, "Why wouldn't you wear that 100 to the ribs? Why are you getting out of the box?" Like, what? Are you being serious?
It makes my ribs hurt thinking about it.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, how hard is it to, you know, get that bunt down on the 85-mile-an-hour slider? Like, what? Like, come on. Like, you're kidding, right?
It's not easy. It's not easy.
Like, or my favorite, like hey, you have to have a haircut. Like, can't have hair below your, like, Rungy's hair. You can't look like that.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? It's just like, we're in a different era now.
We really are. And that ideology has been left in the past. And there are some people that are just hanging on to it for dear life. But like, to really, you know, make that a major priority in a program, that's being phased out very quickly. And kids don't want to do that. I'm not scared to necessarily, like, I just know, like, at Mesa Community College, which was like one of our rivals at SCC, like, those kids had to have They were clean shaven. Actually, I had to be clean shaven at Mississippi State. But at Mesa Community College, like if you showed up and you had like even a little, fuzz on your face, they had a dry razor for you, is what I heard. So it was just like, that was how the culture was, and that way is going out, as far as I'm concerned.
I could shave before practice and have some stubble. Probably that'd be terrible.
Yeah, like let's get to the point. Like I'm here to work.
Yeah.
Well, and and I get the little things matter, and like
Right.
all of the stuff. Like I think it's Pat Bailey from Oregon State has a saying like, the direction of your hat is the direction of your life. Yeah, think about that one. Like you're wearing it forward, you're going like that's crazy. But like, I think at some point that sort of stuff is gonna get just kind of bumped to the side just because like and I don't know. So I've talked to my head coach, my boss at Shoreline. He's probably 55, 56. And it's like, you young coaches really don't have a lot of respect is kind of what he says. And I'm there and I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, like you just walk around here like it's like your guys' thing. Like all of them do. Like you go to these recruiting events and it's like everyone's buddies now. So it's just the culture's changed. It's not the like, I hate my opponent. It's like, oh, I just talked to him 10 minutes ago and, we're going to get on a bus and go play them. Like we're boys. So it's kind of that interesting, like the fraternity of baseball's kind of grown a little bit more now, where it's like all the guys that you played with in summer ball and had the opportunity, it's like now they're coaching and you're going to run into them at some point.
Yeah, you don't need to have an irrational hate for somebody anymore. Like that was kind of a thing back in the day where it's like, even Michael Jordan and like Kobe said one of his, greatest teachers was Michael Jordan. And he said he never would have been as good if he wouldn't have had those conversations he had with Michael. So like that's kind of just the mutual respect that was always had between the elite level guys that is becoming more and more prevalent. As it's like that you don't have to hate your opponent, but you do have to give everything you have for your team during the game.
Although I will say this about MJ after watching, did you guys both watch the doc?
Mm-hmm. I did.
Is MJ the most petty guy of all time?
I will say that after watching the documentary, it's not that I'm not like a huge fan of sports in the way that a lot of people are. I respect MJ. I think he's possibly the greatest player of all time. I don't care to say who the greatest of all time is. The argument is not worth it. But MJ definitely was somebody that would have gotten on my nerves as a teammate. Although he would have pushed me and made me better, no doubt. That's what he did for the Bulls. But I mean, like when he was calling people out on the airplane, like saying like, with all the drugs and stuff that he referenced, like don't be throwing people under the bus like that either. I didn't really like that.
Well, or just just everything about it. It's like, like 6 years ago, I met this guy when he was a rookie and he said I couldn't guard him. So that's the reason I hit the shot against the Utah Jazz. It's like, what? No.
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah. And someone would piss him off and then he'd enter like beast mode. And it was like, that is petty in a sense.
Is it petty or is it just what he had to do to be that? Cause like there's a short list of like people who like aren't human in my opinion, and like Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods are on that list where it's like there's just a different like level of like eliteness. And so like, but it's like, is that really what you needed to do? Was like, and first off, the whole thing about him thinking that his pizza was poisoned, that's just kind of ridiculous to me. But
yeah,
I don't know, it's just I
think that what you're kind of referencing is that like Michael Jordan and like Tiger Woods, that is when you have all of the gifts of something and you completely unlock them with like your mentality and other things. Like that's that elite level that I think you have to get at, is you're, one of the most talented people ever, and you used your mind and you worked your ass off to achieve. So I think that's kind of what that is.
Well, and like I think it was Kobe who said like, when you do what guys like that did in their profession, like you're not going to walk out with a lot of friends, because there's no way to, actually will your team to be that good every single year. without having a little bit of having a little bit of shit to you.
Right. Yeah,
No
you
doubt.
have to be a little not personable to have that level of focus every single day.
100%.
Yeah. And as we wrap it up here, Booney, is there anybody you want to shout out or throw some love to before we say our goodbyes?
Let's shout it out to Derek Chapman.
Derek
Hopefully
Chapman.
Chappie watches this one.
Shout it out to all the JUCO bandits out there as well.
Oh, JUCO
Absolutely.
bandits, Bend Elks. Let's see. That's all I got.
Go Chokes.
Go Chokes.
And
Go
Herd. Go
Chokes,
Herd.
man. Shoot. All right. Well, as always, it's been a different podcast, and we appreciate you coming on, Boone. And if anybody has to or wants to follow up with us, we will have everything that you need to either hit up Sam or Lou and I in the description. And be sure to share it, like it, comment, whatever you need to do. And as always, thank you both. And you guys take care of yourselves.
Of course.
Cheers.
Peace out, brothers.
Peace.